Beterbiev comfortably beats Callum Smith, scoring a 7th round knockout in pretty emphatic fashion, walking him onto a short right hand, coming back with a combination, and pretty easily disposing of Callum Smith. The fight went kind of like how I thought it would, except I thought Callum would pose a little bit more resistance in this fight. Before the fight, I picked Beterbiev to stop him in the 9th. I didn't think Smith would win. I thought he didn't really have too much of a chance. I thought he had a puncher's chance. Maybe to catch Beterbiev on the way in with something big. Callum is a big puncher. He definitely hits hard, as we've seen with his previous couple of knockouts. And even at 168 pounds, he managed to stop Groves. He's definitely a big puncher with both hands. Straight right hand, short left hook. But he really wasn't able to get much power into his punches in this fight because Beterbiev was particularly more defensively aware in this fight. He was shelling up, he was keeping his hands up, he was tucking his chin. He was fighting, he was moving off at angles, he was using his footwork. And another thing that I think contributed to him being beaten in pretty comprehensive fashion in the way that he was the fact that, let's just keep it real, he wasn't able to impose himself on Beterbiev. With how big Callum was at 168 pounds and how much more fresh he looked at this weight, I was thinking he would be a little bit more physically threatening to Beterbiev. And while he was similar in terms of size and mass, he was never able to really bully him or get him on the ropes. There were instances in which he was able to use his distance, catch him with body shots here and there, push him out of range momentarily, but in the first 15 seconds he got put on the ropes. And at that point, I just knew that the writing was on the wall. One of the easiest performances, really, of Beterbiev's career. I thought Callum won maybe a round or two, but overall, I never really thought Beterbiev was under any serious threat. He won those rounds kind of on work rate. Making Beterbiev reset his feet. Beterbiev was obviously careful in this fight, but when he did go in, he was very smart about it. He smothered Callum Smith, just framing his punches, leading off with the jab, piercing through his guard, stepping off to the side, and overall just not giving Callum much room to punch. Callum is a decent inside fighter, but he does kind of need space to operate with his punches unless he's going to the body. That's obviously going to be a more difficult task against Beterbiev because he shells up, and he's a shorter man. He's shorter by what, 3-4 inches? So he wasn't going to be able to land on his body easily. And then he was going to be too far inside for him to land considerably powerful shots on his chin. I'm watching the fight again right now, and you can just see how well Beterbiev is working the clinches. Anytime Callum tries to create space, he's locking onto one hand and working with another free hand. It's just a very routine performance, a clear difference in class. I thought Callum looked a little bit stronger, more rejuvenated in this fight than the Canelo fight, where I just thought he looked straight up flat. He was poor, didn't seem to have any energy, and after the first 2-3 rounds, he seemed spent. But in this fight, he was going to work a little bit, but he didn't have anything for him in terms of physical strength. He wasn't even able to get that much power on his punches. He seemed hesitant to really fully commit, apart from the occasional check left hook where Beterbiev was just completely out of position and wasn't really under threat to land any counter, or Callum wasn't under any threat to land any counters, and sometimes he would fire off, short little left hooks, but they didn't have any real effect. Callum is obviously very hittable. We saw in the Bowder League. John Ryder fight, he got his ass beat. Really probably should have lost that fight, but even in the Bowder League fight, which he scored, a pretty emphatic 4th round stoppage in, he was getting touched a whole hell of a lot in the first 2-3 rounds. He's a pretty defensively neglectful fighter. He doesn't really use a lot of head movement. He's not quick on his feet really at all. He's got okay foot speed, like it's not completely stuck in quicksand like a Danny Garcia at 147 pounds, but he's not quick on his feet. He's not quick enough to get in and out of range, and he was an easy, heavily available target for Beterbiev to just rough around, play with a little bit, and just get out of there. Apparently Beterbiev is looking at fighting Bivol next. Put it like this, I hope it does happen next. Apparently the Saudis are willing to put up the money for it, which means it'll happen since, at that point, them offering the money up effectively overrules any type of politics because the money's too big. It's worth the risk. Any big fight at that point, if the Saudis are putting the money up for it, is a suitable cash-out fight. So, I hope they put up the money for the fight, and I hope it gets made. I think in every era of boxing, I don't really have a pound-for-pound list at this point. I mean, I've made pound-for-pound lists before and all that type of stuff, but you can't really make an objective pound-for-pound list, and I kind of prefer to separate certain eras into certain tiers. And after every era, there is, in my view, an elite top tier of fighters. In the 80s, it was the Four Kings, and then you had other fighters, Roman and Galaxy. And you could throw Salvador Sanchez in there, even though he was also in the late 70s. In the 90s, you had Roy Jones, Pernell Whitaker, Oscar De La Hoya. That was kind of the top tier. Lennox Lewis, Evander Holyfield. In 2000s, you have Mayweather, Pacquiao. There's other names you can throw in there. Marquez, Morales, Barrera. You could maybe make a case for a guy like Arce. But those are generally... That's kind of how I see it. After every era, you have maybe one face, but generally you have about 5-10 fighters that you would consider to be the face of their era. In the 2010s, Chocolatito, Mayweather, Pacquiao, obviously, Canelo, and you could even throw Inoue in there. But in this current era, in this current incarnation of boxing, really since post-Mayweather, the guys you would associate as the faces of boxing since then are Crawford and Inoue safely there, and now that the era is kind of coming to a close and we're moving on to the younger fighters like Haney or Shakur or whomever, Junto, now we're kind of deciding, we're in the latter stages and deciding who the faces of this era currently are, which would be Crawford and Inoue kind of solidified at the top. If Usyk beats Fury, he's comfortably in that position, and if Beterbiev manages to defeat Bivol, he also enters that circle, in my opinion. If Bivol is able to beat Beterbiev, considering he also has the Canelo scalp on his resume, he enters that position. Canelo is also in that position too when you consider the body of work he's had. I would also say Estrada, a few other different guys. But Beterbiev, if he's able to defeat Bivol, and I think that's very important when naming a guy sort of a face of an era, one of the faces of an era, that they fight and beat their main rivals, or at least fight a good portion, fight a good portion of their rivals and beat a number of them and build up a huge resume. If Beterbiev is able to defeat his main rival in Dmitry Bivol, especially with the type of standing he holds, with beating Canelo and the title defenses he's had in the division and his dominance, that, in my opinion, puts him probably in that circle, because that would solidify him as an all-timer at light heavyweight. In my view, that would solidify him as the greatest light heavyweight since at least Roy Jones, and maybe even better than that, because I think he'd have the better individual victory. So Beterbiev, man, what can I say? Great performance. Make the Bivol fight next. One more thing. PEDs, apparently Eddie Hearn and Tony Bellew are throwing a little shit fit about Beterbiev having, not adverse findings, atypical findings of like boosted testosterone. Is Beterbiev on something? Who the fuck knows? He hasn't tested positive for anything, so there's no need to persecute it or hold it against him. But look, let's just keep it real. It's always funny to see these types of meltdowns. Tony Bellew obviously complaining about Beterbiev despite having no failed performance-enhancing drug tests. Whereas whenever a matchroom fighter tests positive for PEDs, he's my mate, and I know him from a young man. He's a good lad, and he would never do no shit like that. And no failed test from Beterbiev, but anybody from matchroom who fails to test, it's a conspiracy, and we gotta wait for the B sample to come back, and his shit was contaminated. I mean, it's a nice little PR spin. I don't even think many people are falling for it at this point, because any type of credibility from matchroom and drug testing, or really just drug testing in general as boxing, is completely obsolete. So I would pay no mind to that. If Beterbiev fails a test, we can start talking about it. But if not, we gotta let things be how they are. If you ask me, I mean, he probably is on some shit, but I mean, just because he's on something, that doesn't mean it's banned. I mean, I would say pretty much every top-level fighter is on a performance-enhancing drug of some sort, or some supplement to help them boost their performance. Whether it's illegal or not is a different question. And, of course, some guys cover it up, as was the case with Conor Benn before the Eubank fight. But, we'll see. I hope the fight between Bivol and Beterbiev happens next, and have a good one.